Disney buried its own Oscar. James Baskett won an honorary Academy Award for playing Uncle Remus, and the studio that put him there has spent the last 4 decades pretending the movie he won it for doesn't exist. Song of the South premiered in Atlanta in November of 1946, a hybrid of live-action and animation built around Joel Chandler Harris's Uncle Remus stories. In March of 1948, Baskett received his honorary Oscar, becoming the first black male performer to receive an Academy Award of any kind, and at the same ceremony, Zippity Doo Dah won Best Original Song. It should have been one of the studio's proudest titles. Instead, it became the one film Disney won't touch. The film presents an idealized version of a plantation-era Southern setting, and the NAACP objected to that depiction at the time of release. Every decision the company has made since has flowed from it. The last United States theatrical release was a 40th anniversary reissue in 1986, and the film has never been issued on any American home format. Not VHS, not Laserdisc, not DVD, not Blu-ray, not digital. A Walt Disney Treasures edition was reportedly prepared in the mid-2000s, with Disney-focused outlets crediting the decision to stop it to then chief executive Bob Iger. It never shipped. Iger said publicly in 2020 that the film would not appear on Disney+, describing it as not appropriate in today's world. That leaves a title that has now been commercially unavailable in America for roughly 40 years, which is longer than it was ever available. And the strange part is what the company kept. Disney held on to the Oscar-winning song and built Splash Mountain, a log flume ride made entirely from the film's animated characters, which ran in its parks from 1989 until it was rethemed as Tiana's Bayou Adventure in 2024. Disney kept the Oscar-winning song and ran a 35-year theme park ride built on the characters, then let the film that produced both of them go unavailable in its own country. Heaven's Gate lasted 6 days. United Artists screened Michael Cimino's Western for the New York Press on November 19, 1980, and had it out of theaters and back on a shelf before the following week was over. Cimino had just won Best Director for The Deer Hunter, so the studio had every reason to protect him. Then the reviews landed. Vincent Canby's notice in the New York Times was among the most hostile ever printed for a major studio release, and 2 days after that screening, United Artists withdrew the film completely, announcing it would be recut from its 240-minute length. Cimino delivered a 149-minute version in January of 1981, and a final cut went wide that April. It didn't help. The film had cost roughly $44 million and took in about $3.5 million, which works out to under 8 cents back for every dollar spent. That failure is widely cited as the reason Transamerica sold United Artists to MGM later that year, ending the studio's independence. Almost nobody in Hollywood has ever recalled a finished film from theaters days after opening it, and the studio that did it didn't survive the decision. Cimino eventually restored his own 216-minute version and premiered it in Venice in 2012. The version United Artists pulled off the screen is the version that now sits in the Criterion Collection. Kubrick erased his debut. Fear and Desire came out in 1953, and by most accounts, Stanley Kubrick destroyed its original negative himself. He decided almost immediately that it was an amateur exercise, so he buried it. He blocked any further release, refused permission for public exhibition of the surviving prints, and went looking for the copies that were still out there. He didn't get them all, but he got enough that the film wasn't legitimately available anywhere for 46 years. Then the Library of Congress restored the surviving 62-minute version, and Kino Lorber released it in 2012, 13 years after he died. The archive that finally undid his ban went on to acquire an even longer cut he'd also buried, a 70-minute version screened in Venice in 1952 under the title Shape of Fear. Half an hour vanished. MGM previewed Freaks in 1932, watched the audience react, and cut so much out of it that more than a quarter of the movie no longer exists in any form. Todd Browning made it for MGM immediately after the success of Dracula. Then came the test screenings. They went badly enough that MGM ordered extensive cuts, and over half an hour of footage came out. None of it survives. The removed material was never preserved, and no complete print of the original version is known to exist anywhere in the world. MGM pulled the film early, several American theaters refused to book it, and British censors rejected it outright, which is why the British Board of Film Classification didn't certify it until 1963, a 31-year gap. What's left runs roughly an hour, against an original that ran about 90 minutes. The cuts took Browning down with the picture. MGM's biggest horror director after Dracula made 4 more films, and then quit the business entirely. Hopper never got it back. Dennis Hopper won a prize at the Venice Film Festival in 1971, and Universal gave the winning film about a week in theaters before removing it from circulation for the rest of his life. The last movie was directed by and starred Hopper. financed and distributed by Universal on the strength of Easy Rider. The executives wanted it recut. Hopper refused. So the studio ran it barely a week in New York and Los Angeles, and then pulled it, and it stayed effectively unavailable for decades, with no meaningful home release and no reissue. He just handed Hollywood one of its most profitable films, and used the leverage to make something the studio couldn't sell. And the response wasn't a bad review, it was removal. Most Americans couldn't legally watch it until Arbalos Films restored it and put it out in late 2018, 47 years after Universal took it away. By the way, if you're enjoying this, I post videos like this all the time, and a subscribe would really help out. Thanks. The missing reels were melted. RKO took 43 minutes out of Orson Welles' second film, and then melted the film stock down so the nitrate could be reused. Welles delivered a 131-minute cut of The Magnificent Ambersons to RKO in 1942, and a test screening that March produced preview cards complaining the film was too dark in tone. That was all the studio needed. RKO put editor Robert Wise on a recut, and by the time it was finished, 43 minutes were gone, and a new, more upbeat ending had been shot without Welles involved at all. That's roughly a third of the film he handed in. The released version runs about 88 minutes. What makes this different from every other studio recut is what happened next, because the excised footage was never archived. It was melted down for its nitrate content, and accounts differ on why. Some sources say the stock was reclaimed for wartime use, others say RKO simply needed the vault space. Either way, no copy of the original cut is known to survive. Nobody kept one. Welles wasn't even in the country while it happened. He was in South America on a State Department film assignment, and he described the result plainly years later. They destroyed Ambersons, and they destroyed me. RKO put the shortened version out in August of 1942 with almost no support, and it lost money. People have been hunting for a surviving long cut ever since, including a widely reported search in 2021 for a print shipped to South America. And in 2025, a San Francisco company announced it would try to rebuild the missing 43 minutes with a generative model, and Welles' own estate came out publicly against it. Hitchcock hid 5 classics. For about a decade, you couldn't legally see Vertigo anywhere on Earth because Alfred Hitchcock owned it and had taken it off the market himself. He'd negotiated outright ownership of 5 of his films, which was almost unheard of for a director in that era. The 5 were Vertigo, Rear Window, Rope, The Trouble with Harry, and The Man Who Knew Too Much. By the early 70s, all of them had been withdrawn from circulation completely. No theatrical bookings, no television, no revival houses. They simply stopped existing. Collectors and critics started calling them the missing Hitchcocks, and they stayed missing for roughly 10 years. Every other entry here involves someone taking a film away from the person who made it. This is the person who made them taking 5 of the best regarded pictures of the 20th century away from everybody at once. Universal acquired the package after his death for a reported $6 million, and the film started returning to theaters in 1983, with new prints and new advertising campaigns. Rear Window alone took about $9.1 million on that reissue, more than Universal reportedly paid for all 5 put together. Barbie dolls got it pulled. Todd Haynes made a 43-minute film about Karen Carpenter, using Barbie dolls as the cast, and a copyright ruling took every legal copy of it off the planet. Superstar, the Karen Carpenter story, came out in 1987, and it used Carpenter's recordings Haynes had never licensed. Richard Carpenter sued for copyright infringement and won, and the film was withdrawn from circulation in 1990. It never came back. Reporting on the case notes he also objected to how the film portrayed his family. Since then, it has survived only as bootlegs and academic screenings. Haynes said in 2022 that the film had been remastered by UCLA and Sundance, and that a legal path to an official release might exist. A film nobody is legally allowed to distribute has been remastered by 2 of the most respected institutions in American cinema, waiting on a rights deal that still hasn't arrived. The uncut version stayed locked. Warner Brothers cut a 4-minute sequence out of Ken Russell's The Devils before release, and then kept that footage locked away for more than half a century, even after a critic found it inside one of the studio's own warehouses. The film came out in 1971, based on real 17th century events in Loudun, France. British censors required the removal of a scene of nuns desecrating a statue of Christ before they'd certify it, and Warner cut it. The studio then issued a censored pan and scan videotape in 1983, and effectively stopped releasing the film at all. The critic Mark Kermode located the removed footage in a Warner film storage facility, and it surfaced in his documentary on Russell in the early 2000s. So the material wasn't lost. It was found, restored, and sitting in a building the studio owned, and Warner still declined for years to put it back into any release. That changed this year. A new restoration built from the original camera negative, referencing the edit Russell privately assembled in 2004, premiered in Cannes Classics in May, and after 55 years, the studio that buried it is the one putting it back in theaters, through a new sublabel called Warner Brothers Clockwork this October. Silver was worth more. MGM cut Erich von Stroheim's Greed from 42 reels down to 10, and then, by von Stroheim's own account, burned what was left over to reclaim the silver in the film stock. He'd shot it almost entirely on location, including 2 months in Death Valley for the finale, and his first assembly ran 42 reels, somewhere between 8 and 9.5 hours depending on projection speed. The studio ordered him to cut it. He said no. He went down to 24 reels and refused to go further, so MGM took the film away from him and released a version of about 10 reels, roughly 2 hours and 20 minutes. That means around 3/4 of what he shot never reached an audience, and no duplicate negatives or work prints of the long version were kept. Von Stroheim stated on several occasions that MGM burned the discarded footage to recover the silver content from the nitrate stock, and that claim rests substantially on him rather than on studio records, though nobody has ever produced the footage to contradict it. What exists now is a reconstruction. In 1999, Turner Entertainment assembled a 4-hour version combining the surviving film with roughly 650 production stills, following von Stroheim's own continuity script. He never directed his way out of it. His most famous work afterward was as an actor. Von Stroheim spent that role playing a ruined director screening his own unseen film, and the picture they run in Norma Desmond's living room in Sunset Boulevard is Queen Kelly, a real film he was fired off of. The trims hit the trash. 20th Century Fox threw the leftover footage from the most expensive film ever made at the time into the garbage to free up storage space. Joseph L. Mankiewicz screened a 6-hour cut of Cleopatra for Fox in 1963, and the studio cut it to roughly 4 hours for the premiere, then to just over 3 for the wide release so theaters could add showings. About half the film he assembled never played anywhere. He proposed splitting it into 2 separate features, Caesar and Cleopatra and Antony and Cleopatra. Fox said no. According to the restoration team that later went looking, executives disposed of the leftover material around 1979 while clearing storage, and a studio-funded search for the missing elements came up empty. Only a handful of silent deleted scenes were ever recovered. The most expensive movie ever made at that point lost half of itself to a storage cleanout, and when Fox paid to go find it, there was nothing left to find. A judge blocked it worldwide. A Florida judge signed an order in April of 2002 forbidding a finished, released American film from being distributed anywhere on Earth for an indefinite period. The Prophet came out in August of 2001, screening at a theater in Clearwater, Florida, and premiering at the Cannes Film Festival. The Church of Scientology moved to block it, arguing in its filing that the film could influence the jury pool in the wrongful death case concerning Lisa McPherson, who had died in Clearwater. The court agreed. Senior Circuit Judge Robert E. Beach signed an order enjoining the film from worldwide distribution indefinitely, and the ruling turned on a finding that an average person viewing the film could perceive it as a parody of the Church of Scientology. The underlying McPherson case settled in 2005, and the injunction fell away with it. Nothing happened. The film has still never had a proper wide theatrical or home release, and it circulates only through unauthorized online copies. The court order that buried it is long gone, and roughly 2 decades later there's still no legitimate release, which means the ban outlived the injunction that created it. Spielberg erased the guns. For the 20th anniversary of E.T. the Extraterrestrial, Steven Spielberg digitally replaced the federal agent's shotguns with walkie-talkies, and then made that the version you could buy. The 2002 re-release carried several other alterations too, and the unaltered 1982 cut wasn't the default on it, so for roughly a decade, the changed version was the one in circulation. He took it back. Spielberg publicly reversed himself in 2011, saying, "Then I realized what I had done was I had robbed the people who loved E.T. of their memories of E.T." The 30th anniversary Blu-ray in 2012 restored the original 1982 version with the firepower intact. Spielberg is the only filmmaker on this list who erased his own movie and then said out loud that he'd robbed the audience of its memory of it. No censor was involved. A Clockwork Orange was never banned by the British government, and Stanley Kubrick pulled it out of Britain himself in 1973. The film had opened there in early 1972 and was distributed widely through the following year. Then Kubrick, who lived in England, instructed that it be withdrawn from British distribution entirely. It stayed available in every other territory where it had opened, which is the detail that gives the whole thing away. No court order existed. This wasn't a country banning a film, it was one man removing it from one country. Press coverage at the time tied the decision to reporting that linked the film to copycat incidents and to threats directed at Kubrick and his family, though he never issued a public explanation, so the motive has never actually been confirmed. What is confirmed is how long it held. He refused every request to screen it in Britain for the rest of his life. Kubrick died in March of 1999. The withdrawal was lifted in the spring of 2000, and the film went back into British cinemas. Most people still assume the censors did it. British censors had already passed the film Uncut in 1971, and never once asked for a frame back. Lucas replaced his own film. The 1997 special editions didn't sit alongside the original Star Wars. They took its place. And for nearly 30 years, George Lucas refused to let the version people actually saw in 1977 come back. Those editions added computer-generated elements and altered scenes, including the exchange in the cantina and a new sequence with Jabba the Hutt. After that, the unaltered 1977 theatrical version never got a restored release. The closest anyone got was a 2006 bonus disc that recycled the 1993 Laserdisc transfer. Lucas has been consistent about why. Speaking at Cannes in 2024, he said the filmmaker should have the right to have his movie be the way he wants it, and he has pointed to that Laserdisc release as evidence the audience reaction was negative. Then, a print surfaced. In June of 2025, the British Film Institute screened an original Technicolor print at its Film on Film Festival, the first theatrical showing of the unaltered version in nearly 47 years, and Lucasfilm confirmed it's one of very few surviving originals. 6 months later, Lucasfilm announced that a newly restored version of the original 1977 theatrical cut will return to theaters on February 19, 2027, for the franchise's 50th anniversary, carrying none of the 1997 changes. On that date, the version George Lucas spent decades keeping out of theaters goes back into them, with the cantina scene exactly as audiences saw it in 1977. If this was worth your time, consider subscribing so you catch every upload. Thanks for watching.